For more on this subject, I want to bring in Rebekah Koffler now. She is a former Defense Intelligence Agency officer and the author of Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. Rebekah, good to have you back with us.
Thank you for having me, Vince.
All right, so this week, a couple of big developments when it comes to the United States, Ukraine, and Russia. President Biden begins authorizing the use yesterday of long-range American missile strikes done by Ukraine into Russia's mainland. And then overnight, Ukraine took Biden up on the offer, began firing these missiles. And then Russia is now saying that this could lead to a third world war in the very same day where Vladimir Putin has just lowered Russia's threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. What am I to make of this, Rebekah Koffler?
Well, we're in a very, very dangerous situation, Vince. We actually war-gamed this back in the intelligence community dozens and dozens of times. This is exactly how the United States gets dragged into war with nuclear Russia, which has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And typically the crisis escalates out of what the Russians call a local war, such as the one in Ukraine, dragging in the U.S. And the reason why the Russians are interpreting Biden's insane decision to authorize Ukraine to use the U.S. long-range missiles to strike deep inside Russia. They interpret it as an act of war because those attackers, they don't fire by themselves, even though the Ukrainian soldiers technically could push the button. All of the targeting of the weapon, the software program to make sure that the missile flies in the right trajectory, that requires U.S. personnel and U.S. satellites. And so what the Russians are saying is that U.S. now is officially the party to this war, and we are now on the target list.
So I'm trying to, let's begin with like the best case scenario for a moment. Rebekah, what is this supposed to accomplish? Is the idea that if Ukraine gets to fire American missiles into Russia, that Russia will abandon Ukrainian territory entirely, wave the flag, and say, okay, we're done? Is that what they think is going to happen?
So I am an intelligence analyst who is able to penetrate Putin's mindset. That's my expertise in Russian warfighting strategy.
Yeah.
I have no clue what Biden's rationale is. I mean, there are various theories why he did what he did. It truly sounds insane because Biden himself just recently explained to his DNC donors at the fundraising event is the reason why he was trickling down weapons to Ukraine rather than providing them in mass numbers to actually make a game-changing difference on the battlefield is because the threat of nuclear Armageddon was real, and because he did not want to get the United States into World War III. Those are his words. So he is now doing exactly that. He's wanting us into World War III. And so I'm struggling to interpret this deranged behavior. Is he doing it on purpose? I heard some, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? But I'm just going to go ahead and say it because the difference lately between the conspiracy theory and a fact is a couple of months, whether
Yes.
it's the Hunter Biden laptop or COVID, right? So
Or like Putin blew up the Nord Stream pipeline?
There's a hypothesis that Biden is trying to remain in power by getting into nuclear war with Russia so he can declare a national emergency so that he can prevent President Trump from ever entering office.
Huh.
And look at what they've done to Trump already. I mean, they were hell-bent on preventing another Trump's presidency. They concocted the Trump-Russia collusion. They've staged, orchestrated impeachments, various impeachments, to the point where there have been 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump.
Yes.
I mean, just think about that. So I'm kind of scratching my head here. And
Well,
where is this going? Because it makes no sense.
I mean, insofar as we're reading their corrupt intent, one scenario that I do think is very likely is that you've got an entrenched bureaucracy and a defense industrial complex that doesn't want the gravy train to end and doesn't want to lose power. And if we are forced into a world war, that changes the calculus a bit and entrenches some of those powers for the long term, or at least that might be the thinking. Because President Trump has made it really clear as he comes in, Rebekah Koffler, that he wants to take a meat cleaver to a lot of these agencies, to trim them down, to right-size them, to make them more focused on doing the business of the American people, to make them more efficient. And I think there's a lot of people in Washington who desperately don't want to see that happen.
I agree with you. It makes logical sense what you're saying. Yes, the gravy train would end, right? We have already provided to Ukraine close to $200 billion of U.S. taxpayers' money, and it haven't done a damn thing to, in terms of changing the trajectory and the outcome of this war. But think about it this way. I mean, that would be completely reckless if the deep state and the military-industrial complex were indeed pursuing this goal, because the U.S. intelligence agencies themselves gave Biden their warning as recently as September that if he did indeed provide authorization to Zelensky to strike deep inside Russia using U.S. weaponry, then Putin, and I quote, would launch attacks, including lethal attacks, on Europe and the United States. And I completely agree with this assessment. This has been a standing analytic line in the intelligence community. I served during the Obama administration. I personally briefed Obama's National Security Council, NATO, so everyone is aware of it. So this means, if you are correct, Vince, that means that these people are knowingly dragging us into World War III, because remember, it's not going to stay at Russia, Ukraine, and the United States, because remember, the North Koreans are now fighting on Russia's side. Yes. China will likely join them, Iran. So it's definitely going to be a World War III.
Oh, so let's assess this nuclear doctrine for a moment. So I was just quoting from the New York Times coverage of this. They indicated today that Vladimir Putin has lowered Russia's threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. The new doctrine asserts that Russia could use nuclear arms in the event of an attack by a nation that is backed by a nuclear power. The doctrine's publication on Tuesday, that's today, appeared to be the latest suggestion from the Kremlin that Russia could use nuclear weapons to respond to attacks by Ukraine carried out with American support, and that the response could be directed against American facilities as well as Ukraine itself. So if I'm reading this correctly, Rebekah Koffler, what that's suggesting is that Russia now believes, as of this moment, nuclear attacks on American facilities are in bounds for them.
So, okay, let's just unpack this. Yes, Putin did approve the updates to the nuclear doctrine, right? He lowered the threshold. It's not likely to just recklessly attack the United States with nukes, right? There's a much more gradual, what we call escalation ladder. He would start more likely with destructive cyber attacks on U.S. critical infrastructure. And those are going to be more destructive than regular kind of baseline cyber intrusions that they already do. And the Russians can do a lot of damage to the United States without crossing the nuclear threshold, right? With cyber warfare, space warfare types of attacks. But if everything else fails, then yes, there is such a plan called escalate to de-escalate, whereby we are also on the target list, not only for regular kinetic attacks, but in terms of nuclear as well.
Well, one would assume that they would start, as you point out, as escalatory. If they're going to target Americans, they wouldn't target the American mainland with a nuclear strike. I'm talking about Americans who are in the region. Americans would be killed in a nuclear strike. That would be That would set off, I think, a chain of very destructive events, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I misunderstood. Yes, on the battlefield, absolutely. Because remember, to operate these attackums,
Yes.
it requires U.S. personnel and U.S. satellites. So, from Russian standpoint, those are legitimate targets. So we can have our, sons and daughters burning in Russia's nuclear furnace.
So
That's what these people are doing.
let me explore what's possible here. Obviously, President Trump has won the election, and not only the United States but the world is awaiting his arrival on January 20th. Does that mitigate the risk from Vladimir Putin at all? Meaning, does Putin have any expectation that President Trump arriving could mean a conclusion to the events that are going on between Russia and Ukraine right now?
Putin did have that expectation until Biden's latest deranged move, right? Putin was happy to end this conflict, right, on certain terms, and Trump would have gotten the best deal for Ukraine than anyone could, because the Russians Putin fears President Trump because the Russian intelligence services have profiled him as unpredictable, right, as opposed to Kamala Harris, whom they profiled as vapid, incompetent, and unintelligent. So that now that Biden has done this, it destroyed Putin's peace plan. Why? It's because Putin is not going to trust Trump.
Yes.
Why is that? The Russians are absolutely suspicious of the United States to begin with, because the U.S. policy has not changed for half a century, pretty much, regardless whether it's a Democrat or Republican has been in the White House.
Right.
Washington has pursued the policy of democratization of former Soviet states, such as Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, which the Russians consider it as their Monroe Doctrine. They relied on this state as part of their strategic security program.
In other words, we're bringing those countries into our sphere of influence. They're considered Americanized and loyal to us.
Exactly. And once you do that, if they become part of NATO, NATO U.S. military hardware gets deployed to those places.
Right.
And Putin just can't possibly accept that level of risk, because the flight time of a missile is so short that for Putin Putin believes that there's no reaction time. Just similarly as like if the Chinese decided, or Iranians, to get as close as Canada or Mexico, we wouldn't allow that, right?
Actually, technically, we are allowing that, because the Chinese have taken over the cartels in Mexico, and they're killing over 100,000 Americans a year. But yeah, a normal country wouldn't allow that. You're right about that.
A normal country wouldn't allow that. And that's why Putin right now does not try whatever Trump is going to bring to the negotiating table.
Yes.
Putin is just going to be concerned that either we're bluffing or we're deceiving them. And he's going to proceed destroying Ukraine regardless. Yes, he will pretend that he's going to negotiate with Trump, because he likes to be viewed as, somebody
as a
who
statesman.
loves peace, right?
Yeah, I got
it. As a statesman, and but he's going to drag his feet, and in the meantime, he's going to proceed destroying Ukraine so that Ukrainians throw out Zelensky out of power. The way that we instigated that in Iraq, right? Saddam Hussein died at the hands of its own people. Muammar Gaddafi. Those things had a very deep psychological impact on Putin. He wants to do the same to Zelensky, and that's why the Russians have destroyed already 50% of Ukrainian critical infrastructure. They're trying to plunge them into darkness and freeze Ukrainians as winter is coming, so that they throw out Zelensky, who's already illegitimate at this point because his term expired back in March.
Okay. Lastly, and thank you as always, Rebekah Koffler. in your assessment of Vladimir Putin and how he operates psychologically, I've been wondering your answer to this question. Recently, he was quoted as saying that when President Trump was shot on July 13th, Vladimir Putin interpreted the events of that day as impressive in terms of Trump's reaction. He referred to him as manly, that he had a manly reaction. Is in your view, is that just a psyop to suck up to Trump, or do you think that represented a real and important psychological assessment that would maybe help Trump as he deals with Putin?
So it's actually both, Vince. Yes, Putin was genuinely impressed because manliness is valued highly in Russia, and it is expressed differently culturally, in Russia and in the United States. This is exactly why you see Putin parading, bare-chested and wrestling bears and stuff like that. The Russians love it. But he genuinely was impressed. But it is also at the same time to express his respect and kind of butter up to Trump, because he has to work with him. And Putin is actually rational in a sense that in the Russian sense of rationality and common sense, he's rational. He can be dealt with on a transactional basis. And Putin actually did not rush approving this the lowering of the nuclear threshold, because just as recently, when the reports surfaced that Biden gave approval to Zelensky to strike deep inside Russia, the first reaction of Dmitry Peskov was hypothetical, right? What Peskov said, which is who is Putin's spokesperson, said if such decision was indeed formulated and Kiev regime was made aware of it, then it would constitute a qualitatively different round of escalation in terms of the U.S. involvement in this conflict, right? And then they waited. They didn't overreact, and that is because they don't want to go to into war with the United States. They know it's going to blow up as World War III. And so they waited until the missiles actually started flying.
Yes.
And they even the Russian media even talked about how the Washington Post reported that Trump and Putin spoke. Well, such thing never happened. They said a lot of the time Western media either, runs disinformation. We don't trust them. She said the Biden administration never acknowledged that they gave that decision.
Okay.
So they waited until the missiles actually struck the Bryansk region, hitting military air base.
Yes.
Unfortunately, 5 missiles were intercepted by Russian missile defenses. The third one, the debris landed on the military base.
Okay.
So
all right, Rebekah, we got to run.
Judicious.
This is all very good information, though. We're always so grateful for your time. Rebekah Koffler, the author of Putin's Playbook, thank you as always. Great to talk to you today.